Now, for the other variables like the questionnaire scores, we can use a Spearman correlation test to do this, but we need to set up our data so that it is ranked. So let's do that. Since we are using the Spearman's rank correlation, we are going to take our data and rank it in order, basically. So it's assigning a numerical value to the data relative to what is actually present. So it's not really considering data that isn't actually in the data set. It's only considering what is there. So what we need to do, we want to create another dynamic little table like this for two variables so we can choose which variables we want to compare. But for the ranking part, I want the table set up this way so that I can click and automatically drag down, and the formula will adjust appropriately. And then I'm just going to transpose it for the VLOOKUP functions like we did earlier. So we're going to use rank average. So we're just going to rank all of our data basically, and then use these ranked scores. So we want to tell Excel the first cell, the first value to rank, and then what to compare it to. So our reference. And we want that locked, but we want to leave the first value not locked so that it can adjust for each day, basically. And we want this in ascending order. And we will double click to fill this out, and everything looks good here. So we will do the same thing for all of these variables. So for ranked score, do rank average, and then we'll go to the score here. We'll reference everything, lock it, and we want this in ascending order. I'll do this one more time and then I'll fill out the rest of this myself, but do rank average once again, and we'll go to our data here. Okay, so I will go ahead and fill everything else out. Now that we have everything filled out, I'm going to transpose it. Now, if we just transpose it as it is, the formulas are going to be messed up and we would have to redo them. So I'm going to basically copy and paste the values in place and then just copy the selection and transpose it by going to paste special transpose. Okay, so that looks good. I went ahead and filled out this section here so that we can have our dynamic lists to choose from for variable 1 and variable 2. So again, to do that, we're going to go to the cell here where we want our drop-down list to be, and then we'll go to data validation, go to list, and we are going to use these categories here, the ranked categories. And we can basically just copy this over for variable 2 because we're choosing from the same list basically. So remember that we're using this Spearman's rank so that we can compare the score, the questionnaire scores with something. So if you're comparing two ratio variables, you can just do the Pearson correlation. You don't have to use the Spearman's rank correlation. But since we have the questionnaire scores, we're doing this so we can compare scores with something else. So we are going to do the VLOOKUP functions again. So let's put our VLOOKUP function in. So we are going to look up this variable, and we want to use this table here. We'll lock that in $signs. And we have to do this column by column. So we're going to do the second column and an exact match. So I'll go and fill that out, but for now, we'll also do the same thing for this variable. And we want to adjust for each column here. So I'll finish that up real quick. So now everything is filled out and it's adjusting by each column, and you can see that it should match up with ranked exercise, and everything does match up. And now we can adjust our variables, and everything is working. So now I've made a couple of adjustments on this spreadsheet. So I took out this exercise section and just added another variable section so that we can just compare two variables for a Pearson correlation. So I added the exercise data here, and then I just needed to adjust all of my formulas. So for the drop-down lists, you can edit this in the data validation and make sure that all of this is selected for both, and that the VLOOKUP functions include everything. So that exercise category is there. And for the Pearson correlation, I just selected these two columns here, and I also needed to adjust N because I had this column selected, but I decided to use column D to count the data. And now we can choose between different variables for the Pearson correlation, and if we want to compare the ranked score with something, we can use the Spearman correlation. So let's go ahead and calculate the Spearman's rank coefficient first. So we are going to use the correl function, and we will select our variable 1 data and variable 2 data. And now that's calculated. For N, we will use count again. So we're using the formula in the same way with an absolute, with the coefficient here times the square root of n minus 2 over the square root of 1 minus the absolute of the Spearman's rank coefficient squared. And we can calculate the degrees of freedom in the same way, n minus 2 in this case, and we'll use the tdist function. We'll put the test statistic there, degrees of freedom, and this is two-tailed. So now I just went ahead and cleaned up my spreadsheet and made some nicer looking tables so everything looks a little bit better. And the last thing we're going to do is create a chart so that we can visually see our correlations. So for the Pearson's correlation, we're just going to select our two variables and go to the scatter plot, and I'm just going to make a small little graph here, and I want to show a trend line. So make sure that it is a linear trend line. And I'm going to call this Pearson correlation. So this should adjust as we change our variables. And then we're going to do the same thing for the Spearman's rank correlation. Insert scatter plot, adjust the size, and we want to add a trend line. And this is a Spearman's rank correlation. And we can see how our data looks here. So you can play around with these variables, but just remember when you want to see a Pearson's correlation and when you want to use a Spearman's rank correlation. And that's basically everything for this lab. So as you've learned while doing these labs, there's a ton of different stuff you can do with Excel, and it is a really valuable skill to have to be able to work with data sets. So I hope you all learned something from this, and take care.